Greetings and various assorted salutations. Welcome to another U.S. history lecture. What we are looking at for today is the basics of the Second American Industrial Revolution. Depending on how course structures go, this may be the first lecture, first bit of notes for U.S. History 2 of my classes. Unless they change things, but who knows. Anyways, what we're looking at in this time frame is the kind of the pivotal point where what is the direction America is going after the American Civil War. We are seeing an America developing closer to the America we live in today. The Industrial Revolution, especially this one we're looking at, plays a critical role in taking us to the more familiar era of the present. But to shortly summarize things or laconically put it, I'd say new machines, massive factories, and big businesses are going to transform America into an industrial giant. It's going to change how Americans live and work moving forward. Now, since this is kind of seen as an opening lecture, I may provide some asides and tips and tricks on how to use lecture notes and how to use these lecture videos. First up, I like to give learning objectives. Learning objectives are going to be a rough outline of the things I'm going to be talking about in the lecture. Usually there's 3 or 4. I try and keep it to that. And how some people take notes is these are like the headers of their notes, or the center of the spider web. Depending on your note-taking style. I do have separate tutorials on note-taking, and I'm sure there's other ones out there. My general advice with note-taking is experiment a bit, figure out what works for you, and then do it. Everybody's notes are their own. Your notes are intended for your use, however you use them. Anyways, let's take a look. By the end of this lecture, we're looking to understand describe the major inventions, industries, and figures of the Second Industrial Revolution. 2. Explain how industrial growth reshapes cities, labor, and everyday life. 3. Analyze how industrialization expanded both opportunity and, to some degree, inequality as well in the Gilded Age America. You may not know what all those words mean, but we'll try and cover some of them in the lecture. Feel free to pause the video to look things up as well. Now, there's a few key terms. I try and give a key terms list in all of my lectures. This particular key terms list is not necessarily connected to the key terms list in assignments or activities for this course, the class that students will be taking in person. However, these are terms and concepts that would be useful to you within the context of this lecture. So let's take a look. First up, we have the Second Industrial Revolution. This is the American Industrial Revolution. This is a U.S. history lecture, in case you didn't know that. Which the Second Industrial Revolution is a period of rapid industrial growth, roughly from 1870-ish to 1914. Primarily steel, electricity, and emerging technologies play a role in this. Gilded Age is a term that comes from the author Mark Twain. It refers to kind of this shiny gold-plated thing. On the outside, gold plating looks really shiny, it looks really pretty, but when you get into whatever it is, I think the analogy used was an apple. When you get into it, you realize, oh, it's only shiny and good on the outside. When you get inside, the core is rotten and rotted. And Mark Twain used this as a commentary of the society he was living in at the turn of the century. Corporation is another big term we're coming into. This is a business that is owned by shareholders and is often large in scale and can be national in reach. You're probably familiar with corporations, but maybe you haven't thought about the concept of them more generally. Innovation is another word that comes up, or another idea to understand. This is the idea that there are new inventions or processes that dramatically increase productivity. Let's start with a simple one. You need to get in touch with your friend. 300 years ago, you had to go find your friend and tell him what you wanted to tell him. In the time period we're studying, the telegraph gets invented, and you can tap out a few things with Morse code on in a telegraph office and send it wherever the telegraph wires go. Or nowadays, if we're using modern analogy, you pull out your cell phone, you text the person or call the person and tell them what you want to tell them. Obviously, the cell phone and the telegraph, they're more efficient than going and finding the person wherever they are. There's other examples we'll look at, such as with electricity and something called Bessemer steel, but that's basic. Innovation is an idea or a process or an invention that makes doing things more efficient, usually. Labor is another term that we'll go into more detail in future lectures, but it refers to industrial workers who power the new economy. These are guys who are running the factory machines, things like that. Often these, especially in the time period we're studying, these are dangerous conditions with low pay and long hours. But we'll talk more about them more in the future of this lecture series. Alrighty, let's get on to our first topic, life before the Industrial Revolutions. It's important to keep in mind that America didn't start out as an industrial power. That is something that developed over time. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. So it's important to understand where America was originally coming from. Early America, so we're talking before the American Civil War, was largely farm-based. If you didn't live on a farm or live in a small community that supported the farms around it, that was what most people were. Is you either lived on a farm, worked on a farm, owned a farm, were a farm hand, or you lived in a small community that was often surrounded by farms and supported those farmers, whether it was a place where the market was held, a place where farmers could take their tools to get fixed or buy equipment, things like that. The South was particularly farm-focused. We're talking about south of the Mason-Dixon line. And primarily, we would see their industries be tobacco, and then later on, getting close to the Civil War, cotton became important. In this early America, there were a lot of people who their ambition was homesteading. They wanted to go out and set up a farm on the frontier. This is something that dates back as far as before the American Revolution. Many Americans saw the American dream, or the colonial dream before that, as take my family, go find a plot of land, farm that land, and support my family. Goods that were farmed or materials that were harvested were often shipped off to places like England or France to be manufactured. Additionally, people usually didn't move very far from their families, or they didn't move far from where they were born. This was a society where you pretty much, where you started is where you ended up and started the next generation. Just kind of the basic idea there. American Gothic is a good example of this picture of a father and daughter. Now, leading up to the Civil War, things were starting to change. But the Civil War is going to be a tipping point. Basically, what happens is slavery is a big issue in the Civil War. It's the main issue, quite frankly. But there are other things going on as well. And one of the big issues is an economic divide. The North and the South are diverging economically. And when you talk about economics, or a basic definition of economics is how people acquire their wants and needs through exchange of goods and services and whatnot. That changes how people can think. That changes how people can act and how people operate. And what happened is the South was really focused on producing cotton. They sold this cotton for export. They didn't really want to do anything else. Cotton made them the most money. England, the north of France, other places, they they needed lots of cotton. The American North manufacturing, they needed lots of cotton, and the South was willing, happy, and financially incentivized to produce it. Whereas in the North, we see some changes. In the North, we see states developing cities, trade networks, shipping, and manufacturing. Instead of taking that raw cotton and shipping it off to England, many Northerners would say, well, why don't we just make it into cloth or clothing or blankets or whatever we need here in the North? And this divide, which is covered more in the lead up to the Civil War stuff, is what's going to divide the United States into the American Civil War. And this plays a huge role because the North is focusing its development on manufacturing, making things. The South is working on grow and buy what you need. And when the Civil War breaks out, we see that the manufacturing aspect of the North gives it a huge advantage. It produces most of the guns, more uniforms, it has a larger population base to recruit troops, and basically the Union out-manufactures the Confederacy. It doesn't matter how good your soldiers are if the Union has more ammunition, more soldiers, and can fight longer and better supplied than the other side. And with the triumph of the Union and the reunification of the United States of America, it becomes clear that industrialization is important. Powerful countries like England and France are starting to industrialize, and the United States is going in that direction as well. Now this leads us to, what was the Second Industrial Revolution? Well, perhaps we need to back it up a bit. What's an industrial revolution? Industrial revolution is a shift from making goods by hand to manufacturing them in factories. A factory is a building dedicated to the making of goods. Historically, how a lot of people got what they needed is they made it themselves in their home. So you might, in prior eras, you might sew your own clothes, you might make your own furniture, and you just do that in the home between growing and harvest season, things like that. If you had a bit of money, you might buy it from somebody else who's better at making things than you. But the factory, instead of doing something in the home, you are now taking these things and making them in a dedicated building. People don't sleep in the factory. They go to the factory, they work on the one product, and that product gets sold in large numbers. The Industrial Revolution, the first one, in case you're wondering, the first one refers to a textile industrial revolution, which you learn more about in world history. And the United States kind of went through this as well, where we copy and pasted a lot of the British ideas into our own Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution, however, plays a huge role with using steam power, more mechanization, and later on electricity comes along. There's later industrial revolutions involving computers as well. Now we need to talk about what industrialization requires. Now, industrialization requires four things. It really doesn't matter which industrial revolution we're talking about. Roughly, you need these four things. One, it really doesn't work with the green screen. One, large urban populations. Factories, to work in a factory takes up a lot of your time. In this time period, we're talking like 12-hour days. And so if you are a factory worker, you don't have time to grow your own food. You don't have time to make your own clothes. And so as a result, factories do well in cities because the factory worker can go do their shift, do their job, and then they can pick up groceries, they can pick up what they need with their factory wage, their factory pay, on the way home from work. Factories also locate in cities for other reasons, mainly because cities are kind of the center of a lot of different things. Transportation converges on there. You have large numbers of people who, in theory, can do work as well, things like that. The other thing you need are resources. Resources play a huge role in the Industrial Revolution. It's also going to play a huge role in a lot of the conflicts of the 20th century, like World War I stuff, World War II stuff. You need lots of resources. Factories, since they're able to produce more, they need more. Whereas, like, if you are just making furniture for yourself, you might chop down a tree, a dead tree or something, and make what furniture you need out of that. However, factory, if you want to make 100 chairs, you need more trees, you need more materials. And you got to get those materials from somewhere, whether it's coal, lumber, cotton, whatever. The United States is in the Second Industrial Revolution, gets those resources from westward expansion. The American West is where the resources are at. Out west, you're going to find things like coal, tin, gold, timber, all kinds of things. We'll get more into westward expansion later. As another example of another country, Britain, the British Empire used its vast colonies to supply its industrial might, such as India producing cotton, things like that. France also had colonies in places like Indochina, for example, for producing rubber in another industrial revolution. Another thing you need is transportation. You need to be able to move raw materials into factories, and you need to be able to move finished goods out of factories to wherever they need to be sold, quickly and efficiently. For America, the Transcontinental Railroad is going to be important, and our shipyards along the Great Lakes and the eastern seaboard will play an important role. The last thing you need for a good industrial revolution is consumers. Somebody needs to buy all the stuff that you're making, or you can't afford to pay your workers, you can't afford to buy the materials, and you can't make a living. And so somebody needs to buy all this stuff. And that's going to drive a lot of industrial revolution growth. Is as people start making more money, they start buying more stuff, which encourages more production, things like that. It's a vicious cycle. So remember, there's 4 things you need for industrialization. 1, large urban population. 2, resources. 3, transport systems. And 4, consumers, people to buy this stuff. It's kind of odd I'm going over this multiple times. That might mean it's important later on. Anyways. The second industrial revolution that we're looking at is after the Civil War. The main things are going to be steel and coal, later on oil and electricity. Railroads will also be important. We're also going to see how the United States changes in the Industrial Revolution as people move off the farms and into the big cities. Let's move on. Innovation. Let's talk tech. Now, innovation is what's going to drive a lot of industrial revolutions. Different industrial revolutions have different innovations or ideas and concepts and products that drive things forward. Currently, some might argue we live in an era of in a kind of innovation with artificial intelligence. So that would be a modern example, present-day example. You can look around and see, a lot of new ideas, a lot of new ways of doing things more efficiently, or trying to do things more efficiently, seem to stem from artificial intelligence. In the Industrial Revolution, the second Industrial Revolution in the United States of America, our big innovation is steel, electricity, new communication systems, and new transportation like railroads. Let's break it down. Steel is a strong material. It makes for stronger buildings. It makes for stronger ships. It makes for stronger bridges. That's the basic idea. There's something that's developed. The innovation that makes steel more common is something called the Bessemer process. And the Bessemer process is a way to remove impurities from the raw material iron and make it a more structurally pure material, sturdy, durable material called steel. Ask your chemistry teacher if you're curious about it. Bessemer process is one of those concepts that gets thrown in test questions sometimes. We don't use the Bessemer process really anymore, but that's a funny story for a different day. Electricity is also going to power a lot of machines. You guys can figure out pretty quickly that electricity plays a huge role in innovation. There's a lot of devices where it's like, okay, how do we get this device running? Oh, plug it in. Shove a battery in it. Pretty self-explanatory. Communication is going to be a big one that we are most exposed to, but maybe we don't think the most of. The big communication development is going to be the telegraph and later the telephone. Communication without telephones is not particularly quick. You can see in the chart up here, it could take days, months to get a letter sent across a country. Even the Pony Express wasn't that particularly fast. And the Pony Express is kind of over-dramatized anyways. It didn't run that long. But it captures a mythos. The telegraph could do the same job in about an hour. Oh, in case you're wondering about this fluctuation, 2 days to 2 months, if you throw that letter on a train, it's going to go there a lot faster. If you're just throwing it on a wagon or a horse, maybe not the most efficient method. Transportation is also going to play a big role. The railroad is probably one of the biggest innovations in human history, because up to that point, the fastest you could go was hopping on a horse and riding that horse. But despite that, horses really haven't changed that much across the centuries. Yeah, we developed saddles, horseshoes, put them on better roads that are easier for them to run on. But horses are limited in how far, how fast, and how long they can go. And riding them is not exactly an easy thing either. That's a form of exercise in and of itself. But the train, the nice thing about the train is as long as it has fuel, it can go pretty quick. And as time goes along, they get faster and faster. Some of the earliest trains, when you're thinking the Wild West, they could go maybe 20 miles an hour. Really slow by our definitions, but by their definitions, that would have been incredibly fast. And they only got better from there. Let's take a look at some notable inventions here. Skyscrapers. The idea behind the skyscraper is it allows you to use a small space more efficiently. Instead of building out, you build up. Thankfully, elevators were invented around this time as well. This is why a lot of cities developed a big skyline with big skyscrapers, is because you need to be able to pack a lot of people efficiently. Cities are very large. They contain large populations, but there's land limitations. There's only especially in this time period, there's only so far people can go in a day. And so you need to be able to reduce the amount of space traveled. And the skyscraper was an efficient, cost-effective way of doing that. Trains, obviously, we've talked about them before, moving goods and equipment and people as well. The West, for example, wasn't heavily settled until after it became easier to buy a train ticket. Train tickets are cheaper than buying a wagon and all the accoutrement. The suspension bridge is a big one. The suspension bridge, you'll see it has these wires that or cables that suspend it. The reason why this is important, and especially using steel and concrete for them, is suspension bridges can go much longer. They can connect larger points, and they are much sturdier, and they can carry more weight. Basically, think of a bridge as a shortcut. That's why bridges are important, is often you can't go around a river, or you can, but you have to go really long ways. And boats, ferries, are not as efficient as you think they are. The telegraph and later telephone will play a huge role in communication. It's just more efficient to communicate with these. Electricity and the electric light bulb will play a huge role as well. Electricity allows for powering many devices, and the light bulb's important because now you can light places up that previously weren't able to be lit up. This allows you to work longer or play longer into the day, work longer, play longer, and it changes how people live. Now, when the sun goes down, you turn on the lights. In the olden days, when the sun went down, it got kind of hard to do things, and so your day ended earlier. Alrighty, let's keep going. Now we're going to talk more about big businesses a bit later, but let's get into a little bit of the basics for the introductory lecture. Now, thanks to transportation and better communication, you can now have large businesses coordinate more complicated operations. This is important because this means that you can have a big company, and that company may be drawing raw materials from different parts of the country. Like if you're making a light bulb, you might need to source the metal for the light bulb from a mine in Colorado. You might need to source the glass from the light bulb from sand on a beach on the East Coast. And your factory might be located somewhere like Chicago. And you just get your materials. Through the telegraph, you can say, we need this many materials sent here, and load it up onto the trains and get it there. Or if there's something wrong with that facility, like the mine says, oh, we had a cave-in, you're going to need to source metal from somewhere else, so we fix this mess. They can communicate and make a deal with another mine to get those materials. And large corporations become the way of organizing large, complicated manufacture of goods. Large corporations are going to dominate American economy. Such as eventually companies like U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, General Electric, etc. And these companies will have massive influence. We'll look at it later in the course, but some of that influence will also expand into politics. Corporations will take an active interest in how countries are run. Now, to briefly introduce labor. All these new technologies need people to make them, and you need people to gather resources for them, and you need people to operate the machines to make these things. And so factories are going to develop, and mines are going to develop, and you need workers for them. And many people are going to seek these jobs. Some of these people are going to leave farms or the small communities where they were growing up, as people leave the farm and move to cities. You're also going to see in the United States immigration. There's going to be a number of people, especially early on from Europe, later on also Asia as well, that they're looking for work opportunities, and they come to the United States for those particularly factory jobs. Now, we will look at it in more detail, but unfortunately, these early factory jobs are dangerous, miserable, and have long hours. Workers are going to be exploited. Children, women, men, all kinds are at risk because the factories realized this is their livelihood. You can lower the pay to save money. And they'll keep showing up because if they don't show up, they don't make money, and the factories will hire somebody else. We'll get more into detail of that later. Now, we're going to wrap up with the legacy of this. The Second Industrial Revolution does a number of things, which we'll look at in more detail in class. One, it's going to make the United States an economic powerhouse on the global stage. This is going to set up the United States to participate in World War I and World War II. It's going to move a lot of people. A lot of immigrants came to the United States, and a lot of people left the farms to move into big cities, and their children and grandchildren never go back to either of those places. They will continue to be in the cities. They will continue. It changes the trajectory of generations to come. We're going to see some political and social unrest. The development of labor unions, the push for trying to fix the problems of the Industrial Revolution. And we're also going to see the creation of the modern economy and the modern world we live in today. We live in at least in the United States, we live in kind of what is considered a post-industrial society. But in order to get that, you have to have an industrial society. And many parts of the post-industrial society feel familiar. If you were a time traveler, for example, the Industrial Revolution is going to feel more familiar to you as a time traveler than jumping all the way back to like the Revolutionary period. of the United States. So America's starting to feel more like the America we live in today. That's enough for now. Let's conclude this. Until later.